we don't have to do what we thought we had to do. Is there another way? It's that sparking that curiosity in someone to, again, give themselves that permission to explore parts of themselves through this really loving awareness, through this curious, playful, maybe I could try this. Like, maybe I could try this and be bad at it.
Hi, guys, and welcome to the House Call Vet Cafe podcast. I'm Dr. Eve Harrison. I'm a full-time integrative concierge house call veterinarian in Los Angeles, and I help other vets to build their unique mobile practices on their terms. This podcast is for and by house call and mobile veterinarians, so it is meant to give our community a platform to connect, to share our stories, to lift each other up, and to support each other. Most of us work solo as lone wolves, right? So for me, it's been really powerful to be able to physically hear the voices of my colleagues from all over the world and to get a chance to feel that we truly are part of a community of very real other human beings who get it. While you may be alone in that little bubble of your own vehicle when you're on the road seeing patients, I welcome you to join our community by tuning into our own podcast when you're on your way to your next house call. Whether you're a super experienced house call vet with 30 years of experience, you're a brand new prospective house call vet just looking to get started, or you're house call curious, there will be something for you in this podcast. Each episode, you will hear interviews from other mobile veterinarians just like yourself who are doing unique and innovative things, vets who are sharing their stories, their struggles and challenges, and you can also look forward to hearing valuable information and perspectives from specialists and experts outside of our micro niche. And finally, if becoming a house call veterinarian is something that you've been thinking about exploring, or you're looking for some extra support getting your own mobile practice to feel more profitable and sustainable for you, check out the information in the show notes about my course and our above and beyond supportive private community for members only, plus our monthly group coaching sessions within the House Call Vet Academy. You can also check out my free public Facebook group, which is also called the House Call Vet Cafe, the same name as this podcast, and which is a warm and cozy community for mobile vets to support each other in professional and personal development, in creative entrepreneurship, and in friendship. So thank you guys for spending time with me today. Let's dive into the episode.
Okay, welcome everyone. We have a really cool episode today. It's a bit of an experiment. I have Dr. Steph Ellen with us today, and we're actually interviewing each other. We've done this before in the past, but it's always a little bit of a different kind of feel it out sort of situation just because we each have our own podcast and we're kind of merging an episode right here. So we'll see how it goes, but I'm really, really excited about it. I have been in touch with Steph for I don't know, almost a year now, maybe through Instagram. And I've been stalking her like a maniac, being like, who is this amazing human? My God. So let me tell you about her. And then I'm really excited also to tell you a little bit about the work I've done with her. And we'll kind of introduce each other to some extent and just see how the conversation goes. So in my usual style, I'm going to go ahead and introduce Steph. She is a multi-passionate recovered perfectionist who wears many different hats, including running a life coaching business called Finding Flowstate and working as an employed equine ambulatory veterinarian. So she is a house call vet, essentially. As a mindful, high performance coach, Steph is wildly passionate about empowering ambitious, soul led high achievers to create their own authentic version of success and to find more moments of flow in their life. Steph graduated as a veterinarian in the UK and traveled to Australia in 2016 for what was supposed to be a stud season or two, but fell completely in love with the Australian way of life and stayed put. Her personal journey has involved overcoming both professional and personal burnout, anxiety, and being kicked in the face by a horse at work. Damn, girl. Drawing on both neuroscience and ancient wisdom, Steph's coaching style is a holistic blend of potent mindset work, subconscious reprogramming, energetics, and working with the nervous system. When she's not working, you'll find Steph trail running in the Aussie bush, practicing yoga, or dancing at music festivals. Okay, so I guess you guys can see like why I'm obsessed with this person, right? So I'm going to welcome you, Steph, to the podcast and see how you'd like to incorporate me into your podcast.
Thank you so much, Eve. It's a pleasure to be here on your podcast. And also, obviously, hello to listeners of my podcast. This is a bit of a new experiment for sure, this mutual interviewing, but if you're coming from my podcast, I'm sure you'll already be able to hear the similarities between my story and Dr. Eve Harrison, who's also on the podcast. So we are both so multi-passionate and really just have this drive to help others create the same sort of multi-passionate, messy, imperfect, beautiful, just smorgasbord of life. We're all about just putting our own unique stamp on how we do things. And I would love to just for you to introduce yourself a little bit, Eve. Generally, we do my podcast slightly differently. So I would love for you to just, in your own words, just to let the listeners know a little bit about you.
Yes, let the nice people know who you are. So, folks who've been listening to my podcast know me by now, but for your listeners, I'm Dr. Eve Harrison. I am a house call veterinarian in Los Angeles. I've been doing this for about a little over 8 years at this point, and I kind of on my journey really work through burnout, through issues of self-esteem, perfectionism, moral injury, you name it, all of the things that veterinarians typically work through. And I never really was able to find my place in my profession working for someone else. And so I ended up basically creating my own house call practice so that I could really provide in the most authentic way to me what felt like good medicine for my clients and my patients and allowed me to live likewise this multi-passionate life that I have. So I'm a semi-professional flute player. I'm also a yoga teacher. I became certified in yoga as sort of a way to heal myself when I was at really, really the lowest point of my burnout and lack of self-worth as a veterinary professional. And I'm also really into mushrooms and plants, and I've delved into that world quite a bit lately. And my house call practice and kind of running my own business as an entrepreneur, an independent entrepreneur, has allowed me to do that. And at a certain point, maybe around 2020, I recognized this overwhelming flood of veterinarians who were experiencing or who had experienced the same thing that I experienced, and that what I believe is close to what you've experienced, Steph, and burnout, and like, if not physically getting kicked in the face by horse, metaphorically getting kicked in the face by the profession, right? So many of us. So in 2020, with the pandemic, it was really, really clear that a lot of vets were just hitting the absolute max that they could handle in this kind of type A perfectionist environment that really can take what our own personal demons are and like mangle them and make them into like this horrific weaponized version of what we think we should be somehow. And so I ended up creating a program called the House Call Vet Academy, where I teach people how to essentially self actualize, find their authentic selves again as doctors and as entrepreneurs caring for animals in order to really reclaim who they are as individuals and as doctors and as entrepreneurs. And so I'm also a bit of a coach, more of a continuing education provider in that way. But that's kind of my story right now. And I found you scrolling the gram. I was like, this person, wow, I need to be in touch with her. So yeah, that's my story.
So much of what you're sharing is it's so much of my experience and my experience with other veterinarians and also people from other careers as well. This like cumulative experience of, like you say, metaphorically being kicked in the face. And it's interesting that you say that and even mention the 2020, because that was actually when I had my physical injury. It was the middle of 2020. And it's probably a good place to sort of slot this in, I think, because I had definitely been on this like hamster wheel of like doing more and more. I'd like had this, dream of being a specialist and was very like laser focused on my career and not really realizing like how much I was being sort of dragged through life rather than really driven by like a genuine desire and joy and passion. It was more a sense of like proving myself. Like if I get this next achievement, if I get some more
Mm,
letters after my name, then
mm,
that will make me feel enough. And of course, that is a beautiful pursuit for someone. Like it's not so much the outcome that was detrimental. It was like why I was chasing it in the first place. And the other parts of myself that I was stopping myself from being and stopping myself from expressing because I felt like it didn't fit the box of what I thought a vet should be. And I know we resonate a lot on this as well. And that's why I love your approach and your multi passionate nature too, because It's all about redefining the limitations that we unconsciously place on ourselves when we put on this hat of being like, I'm a vet. This is what I do now. And when it comes to the sort of physical injury that I had, which thankfully wasn't, I say in inverted commas, that serious. But what it really was for me was this like wake up call of like, that could have been it. That could have been the end. And it was very much like, this is not how you should be living. This is not how you should be living. This is just not it. And I would love to say that it was a massive light bulb moment in the sense that I had that realization and then everything suddenly changed overnight and it was all rosy and I was respecting my boundaries and doing all of these things. But one of the things about this sort of personal development, self-actualization journey is it's a constant process of like remembering who you are and then forgetting again and remembering again and forgetting. You can be 2 steps forward, 1 step back, and that can be part of the challenge. Because even when it happened to me, I only took 2 days off sick. I had stitches in my face, massive swelling. Because it was 2020, I just put a mask on, like a
Oh,
literal mask. I know, because I didn't want to let anyone down.
yeah.
And by this point, I was doing a lot of personal development work, but a lot of it was like self-awareness, but I wasn't necessarily acting on it. And the other parallel that we have in our story is that was what made me do my yoga teacher training, something I'd been thinking about doing for so long. The way that the universe works just never ceases to amaze me because the studio that I'd always wanted to train at and that I'd always want like do my training at, and I'd always convinced myself I didn't have enough time. Like the only reason I had enough time that day that I went there and had the download that I needed to do this was because I had an appointment to get my stitches out. So I took an afternoon off work to go get my stitches out of my face. And then I went to a yin yoga class afterwards and had this beautiful moment of clarity of like, this is actually where you're meant to be. I know it doesn't make sense, but just follow this. And as you know, yoga teacher training is a really transformative experience. The like minded people you meet, the physical appreciation I had for my body, my spiritual practice, the different perspectives, it was life changing. And yeah, it's amazing how I just needed to give myself the permission to try and walk a slightly different path. And the doors that have opened since then, I could never have predicted.
Mm. So juicy and familiar. I mean, I first want to say that one of the reasons that I appreciate your content and the way you share your journey is this real groundedness to it. As we know, the personal development world can be filled with all sorts of toxic positivity, like do this and you'll be perfect, or like just think happy, just do this affirmation and this mantra and everything will be great. And like, I just love how in the beginning of your story, you mentioned that it's these 2 steps forward, 1 step back. It's a back and a forth. And like, we're not on this personal development journey to be just always better, better, better. It's a discussion, it's a conversation with ourselves, us seeing where we're still working on the things and the things that are difficult are still difficult, but now we have just a little bit more support, a little bit more belief in ourselves to be able to move forward. And so I think that subtlety of how you approach things and looking at it from every angle, it's not this simple thing to heal ourselves from being kicked in the face by a horse or our profession or our own internal workings, right? It's like this process oriented thing. Like I was thinking, I just attended a workshop that Steph gave, and I was like moved by this metaphor of like, if you have a bunch of tangled hair and dreadlocks or something, you're not going to take a brush or a comb and just rake it through and be like, they're all smooth. No, it's like, I mean, Steph has curly hair. If you're not watching the YouTube version of this, I have wavy, highly tangly tendencies of my hair. But like for anyone with long, tangly-ish type of hair, like you have to slowly work this thing out. Like you tease it out gently. You don't rake a comb through it. That'll just rip your hair out and be like terrible and painful. So I just kind of love how you introduce that concept. And I also wanted to share my story about when I started yoga teacher training. It was like, and it's just so crazy. Like you were literally getting the stitches out of your face when the moment of clarity came. So for me, the profession has kicked me in the face repeatedly over and over and over again. And like the big one to me was when I was after years and years, like it's been almost like 10 years now. Finally, I can say I was actually fired from my surgical residency. I was vague previously that, it didn't work out. And it didn't. It legitimately mutually didn't work out, but I was released. And ultimately, it was the greatest gift I could ever have imagined. Deeply painful, deep imposter syndrome that I had to work through for many, many years afterwards. Deep wounding to my sense of like, am I a terrible, horrible person? Am I incompetent, et cetera, et cetera. It was a poor match, period, right? And it was the fact that I was out of work that I was like, "Oh my god, this is the time that I can actually do my yoga teacher training," and it was exactly what I needed. It was like the healing I needed myself, and it was for anyone that's considering it, there's a little contingency of veterinarians. Chloe is one of them. Check out Vet Yogi. Love her to death, Chloe Hannigan. Also, Siska Balk. She was also on the show. She's also a yoga teacher. She's a vet nurse. But there's like a little contingency of us, and I think it's not a mistake. I think that the types of trauma that we've been exposed to are answered beautifully or tended to beautifully in the yoga paradigm. And I think part of it is that there's a trauma informed lens that most of us have never encountered before. Like we are immersed in trauma, secondary trauma. Compassion fatigue is secondary post traumatic stress disorder. That's what it is. Where we experience trauma to ourselves, our physical bodies, just being kicked out of the tribe. Like you explained very beautifully also in your recent session about that fear of rejection from the community. If you're excommunicated from the tribe, you're not going to survive, right? And there's a lot of that kind of narrative for so many of us who have not quite fit in the standard veterinary medicine scene, whether it's in the US or the UK or Australia, whether it's in equine, whether it's in small animal surgery. I mean, but the thing is, look at us now. We didn't fit in quite in that way, but look at us now. And we're doing such different things and really making an impact on people's lives. Like the work you're doing is so beautiful and meaningful. And I'd love to tell all of you guys a little bit about a session that I had with Steph. I'll tell you guys in just a minute, but wanted to pass the mic back your way before I talk everyone's ears off.
No, thank you so much for all of those reflections and sharing your story too, because just to tag on to that yoga teacher aspect of it as well. And there are lots of vets who are also yogis. And I think there's lots of people who would like to investigate that side of themselves more. But there is a stigma associated with it in some pockets of the profession, for sure. And I've noticed this even with some of my clients have been doctors and lawyers, even like, so what I can say the tech startup guys seem to be a bit more on board with it, but like have more of like, I guess, that innovation, trailblazing aspect. But I want to share something that I think will really help if anyone's thinking about doing this sort of thing is that I used to work with, this is another practice that I used to work for. And we had a visiting specialist who I really, really respected. She had quite a dry sense of humor and was quite direct sometimes. And she did a little bit of yoga. And we were talking about, like, she's talking about some shoulder pain she gets, and another one of our nurses. And this was at the end of the day. And I was demonstrating in the clinic how to change the position of your hands in downward facing dog, like something like physical practice wise. And then this lady walked in and she said, and again, dry sense of humor. I do not believe it was intended with any malice or anything. She's probably forgotten she even said it. But she came in and she said, "Oh, Steph, remember that you're a vet, not a yoga teacher." And I was like, and again, there was a smile. It was, that sort of glistening, kind of sarcastic. But it was so interesting because in that very moment, I didn't really say anything. We just sort of laughed along. And then I was like, but why do I have to choose?
Yeah.
And I was like, this is so strange. And I had this moment of just like, there are a lot of unhappy people in this profession, unfortunately. And again, this happens in many high achieving professions. There's a lot of valid reasons for stress and burnout in this profession. It's not criticizing the individual or even the profession as a whole, but it's a wider thing than that. It's this idea that if we have had this single point of focus of, I'm going to get through school, I'm going to go to uni, I'm going to do this, I'm going to tick off these things, there's this expectation that you reach this destination and then everything feels okay. And this idea that if you're on this path, that like, don't you even look left or right? Like the only way that you can get to where you want to go is to not get distracted. And it was so interesting in that moment to be like, I actually don't want to just do this. I don't want to just do this. And at that point, I think I'd been qualified 7 years or something. It's just kind of that often people get that 7 year itch anyway, don't they?
Yes.
And I was just like, this is really interesting because I love being a vet. And that's why I still practice. I still practice 3 days a week plus on call. And it's at this point in my life, it's just part of my identity, but it's part of my identity. It is
Mhm.
not my whole identity. And my personal reflection from a lot of the vets that I've been working with and just the general how I felt at times is when we attach too much of our identity to the profession and we forget who we are and they become so tightly ingrained that when you have a bad day or when you have a bad job and you have a bad period of time in your work, that shame, like it becomes shame. It
Mm,
becomes feeling bad about yourself.
mm,
And when you can't separate them and also allow for them to be some blending, because of course, like it's a vocation, there's a passion, there's so much purpose and love and empathy and all of these incredible things that make you an incredible vet. But there needs to be some separation. And I do believe allowing yourself to be multi passionate, that is it the key for everyone? I don't know, but it's giving yourself permission to explore that is so powerful, and I think that's something that you've done so beautifully as well.
Thank you for that. I agree that there is a bit of a stigma. When I started my yoga journey and sort of delving a little bit more into the spiritual, the personal development, or the tender vulnerability, the emotional side of what it means to be a vet and human, like just sort of expanding slowly out of like this box that somehow I thought I had to be in if I were to be a legitimate, valid, respectable veterinarian. Like, what respectable veterinarian is a yoga teacher? Like, that's so frou frou or so like out there, like you must have lost your marbles. First of all, it turns out that there is a valid, well researched scientific basis for the therapeutic properties of yoga. So, first of all, it turns out this completely ties in. It's completely valid and it's completely consistent. We're talking about the nervous system, parasympathetic nervous system, sympathetic nervous system, like the body's response to trauma, like the somatics of like what it means to be a human being. That's the body, that's the physicality, right? There's neurotransmitters that we talk about when we're learning about yoga and how to create a yoga class and have a therapeutic outcome from a yogic experience, right? And then at a certain point, that truth be told, my journey into like the yoga world and a little bit more into the authentic who I am as a whole person came from a place of fuck you. It was like legitimately fuck you all. Like, I don't know if this is my internal voice telling me this is how I have to be, or if it's externally the veterinary community and profession telling me how it has to be, but fuck you. I'm done with it. And like, there's almost like this ragey anger that needed to come out and just be like, screw you all. Honestly, this is what I want to do. This is what I find important to me. And it turns out that leaning into something that I felt so passionately about from inside, authentic, from internal, like you were talking about in the beginning of the episode, like being pulled along a path rather than having it come from within. I sort of flipped that switch. And that moment of fuck you gave me this access, like that anger actually gave me access to do the thing that really was authentic to me. And as such, it worked. And it worked in terms of I felt good about myself, what I was doing. I had veterinary colleagues come to my yoga classes and be like, "Wowie, what is this? What are you doing?" And then I had people that I knew then sign up to become yoga teachers themselves or who are still thinking about it. But it just sort of was therapeutic, not only to myself, but to other veterinarians who are like, "What's that?" When you sort of put yourself out there with the real things that you want to do, who you want to be, that authentic version of you, the multi passionate version, and let all those things shine. Other people see that and it helps to unlock their potential to follow what is meaningful to them. So it's actually been very, very, I didn't know this at the time when I was in that moment of like rage and over itness. I did it for myself, but it turns out that it's beneficial for the community too, right? Have you had that experience as well?
Yeah, there's a couple of things that I'd love to touch on with that because that anger or that like sacred rage, sometimes it's referred to as, it's anger is such a misunderstood emotion because we're so used to seeing the more shadow side of anger, which is like aggression. But it's actually very normal to feel angry about injustice. Like it would be wrong to be neutral when there's injustices happening. And like people, especially once we dive into like the yoga philosophy, like there is a purpose to anger. You can use it as a fuel. You can use it to become a victim as well. You can internalize it, make it into something more shameful. But it's normal to feel anger, especially and like frustration when there's things that you want to do and it's not working and you can see this path and you can channel that into something incredible. Like without anger, we would have no activism. We would have no change happening. If everyone's just like, oh yeah, that's fine, it's okay. And just turning a blind eye, like it's so misunderstood and often channeled into something that's less helpful, but you can use it as something empowering and purposeful. And the other thing that I hear when you're talking about your experience with other veterinarians is this ripple effect. And that's what this work does. It's this someone sees what you're doing and you can just plant that seed. Like it doesn't have to be preaching, it doesn't have to be, come with me, we're doing this together. It's, in fact, that rarely helps.
Right.
It's this just planting a seed of, hey, wait, what do you mean? Like, we don't have to do what we thought we had to do. Is there another way? It's that sparking that curiosity in someone to, again, give themselves that permission to explore parts of themselves through this really loving awareness, through this curious, playful, maybe I could try this. Like, maybe I could try this and be bad at it.
Yeah.
As someone who is a recovering perfectionist and really started my coaching, like helping perfectionists, because it is so common in this like type A high achieving community. And so often perfectionists, like they'll stop themselves from ever trying something because they're worried that they're not going to be good at it. And this can be unconscious. So you can consciously think that process, but a lot of the time you're actually just sabotaging yourself by not even trying in the first place because of the fear of not getting it right. And when you give yourself that permission to get curious, to be playful, to explore those different parts of yourself, to take a path because you are inspired to take that path, knowing that you might have to turn around and that's okay. Like you've always got that internal safety within to come back.
Mhm.
That is just like we all, you find the best treasures down those little paths when you just follow your intuition. You are inspired by people who you associate with, who you connect with. Like that is where the magic happens.
Yeah, absolutely. And kind of on that note, I was inspired by some of the work that Steph does. She was talking about hypnosis, and I'm like, what's that? So I ended up just sort of getting a session with Steph. It was sort of like subconscious healing and a little bit of hypnosis. And it was really amazing. I really didn't know what to expect. It had some overlap with compassionate inquiry, which is a technique of kind of like a therapeutic approach to get at the somatic heart of whatever is going on and move things that are stuck, that are in the body, that are maybe traumatic in origin or just stuck in some other way in the way the brain holds on to them. And I was just completely open to it. I was like, it may be nothing, it may be the most amazing thing ever, but I'm sort of curious. And I think I approached in that way of like playful curiosity, like, cool, hypnotize me, let's see what comes. And it turns out that I had a bit of a bawling session. And of course, speaking to a veterinarian who I knew intrinsically understood some of these things that I'd been holding on to, what came up was from my surgical residency, something I hadn't forgiven myself for, something that happened with a case. And I cried my eyes out. We did this beautiful process. And it's like unbelievable, but like I've been lighter since then. Like, I really felt that it was unbelievable. I'd been holding on to this thing. I didn't even know. I didn't even know how tightly my psyche and my body had been gripping onto this thing. And it was like, it was just a beautiful thing to have this sort of healing session, also with someone who personally and professionally understood the caliber of what I was talking about. And I'm just like pretty much blown away. And I'm like, okay, I need to pivot my entire life right now because damn. But I'm curious to know a little bit more about how you got into the coaching side of things because you're a yoga teacher, and the trauma informed aspects of what we learn as yoga teachers, I can see that very clearly in the work that you do. But there's more. There's other aspects of how you provide coaching. And like talk to me about the hypnosis. Like some people might think it's woo woo and like, oh, well, that's some nonsense right there. I'm done with her. Talk to me about it. Talk to me about the subconscious healing and like why this is not a load of crap, because it's not, you know?
Yeah. I mean, there's so much to say with this. Thank you. Firstly, I really receive the feedback, and it's just great to hear as well, like after the integration of a session, because we caught up sort of just after the session. But it's always good to hear the process afterwards and how it's still having an effect, because a lot of these things, you feel it in the moment, but there is this like longer term, again, it's that ripple effect. It's this how you show up differently and how things just start to make changes from that internal shift. But going back to the beginnings with coaching, when I was doing my yoga teacher training, so I did a 350-hour training over a course of a year. So it was this longer term container for growth, and it was a very well-rounded yoga education. And during that process, I was doing a lot of my own sort of personal development work as well, and starting to realize how powerful it all was and how it was making me a better vet, actually. I was becoming more compassionate with my client. I was very compassionate anyway, like naturally, or almost to a fault at times, with very, very highly sensitive and taking things home. But I was able to have this newfound like clarity, this new way of managing my own emotions. And it just really highlighted to me how needed this was. And the way that I sort of fell into a coaching certification, which was very much, again, this intuitive nudge. I actually had the download in a meditation of something of being like, this is, what you're meant to be doing. Is it going to work? Like, I don't know. But I know that I will learn so much about myself in the process. Like, it started off as just this natural curiosity to learn more about myself. And naturally, when you start finding something that has such an impact in your life, like naturally you find yourself wanting to share it. And as I've progressed with this, I will say now that I was like the most skeptical person about all of this. So skeptical, judgmental. Like, this is a while ago now, but I was the person, if someone told me their like star sign, I would like immediately roll my eyes, like either in my head or actually to their face, and just be like, you're ridiculous. And it's so strange because I have always had this yearning to understand things more, but I really wanted to explain everything. And I think that's a natural part of being a vet as well. It's like we want to get to the bottom of something and we want to fix it.
Yes.
Like we
That's a whole other
Yes,
other subject.
exactly. It is. And I think especially when you first graduate as a vet, it's like, well, I need to know the answer, that answer. And if I don't know it, then I'm a failure and I'm a bad vet and everyone's going to hate me and my patients should be seeing another vet because they'd be better than me. And all of this that just snowballs inside your head.
Mhm.
And the longer you're in the career, for those of us that stay in the career, I think you start to really understand like the more that you don't know and get more comfortable with not knowing. And
Mhm.
not only comfortable, but like humbled and exploring it and just finding joy in that exploration and knowing that you're doing the best that you can. And you don't have to have the answers. And that was sort of the approach I was with coaching. It was like, can I empower others to have more of that effect, more of that lens when they go through life? And as it's sort of grown, it started off more mindset coaching. And I was realizing that I was taking a lot of my nervous system regulation tools from my trauma informed yoga teaching and this mindset work. But there is a whole other part of us, the unconscious mind, that is so powerful, and it's controlling 95% of our behaviors, our reality that we experience. It's like this filter that we're seeing the whole world through. And unless we can speak to that part of us, these changes aren't going to actually change, because how often do you know you should be doing something, but you don't do it? And this is where that self-awareness trap happens for so many highly intelligent people who are able to excavate their trauma. They can tell you why they are the way that they are, but they still feel stuck and they're still not able to actually move forward. And the subconscious mind is part of that missing puzzle piece. And it's how can we work with all parts of it? And the type of subconscious healing that I do, I also, again, fell into that because in 2021, I booked a session with a friend of a friend who had recently done the certification. I didn't know anything about it. I just wanted to support her business.
Right.
So
Right.
I was like, oh, I'll do it. I've probably got some stuff to work through. We'll do that. And I had no idea what it was going to be like. And again, that curious energy of just like no expectations. Let's see what happens. And I thought we were going to talk about one thing, and something else entirely came up about what I thought was like petty boy drama from like this toxic situationship that I'd been in the year before. And I was like, what? What is this bringing up? I didn't even know that I cared. And I was bawling my eyes out as well. And not every session's like that. I just want to say, I was like, we don't, I'm not,
I'm
my,
personally, I'm a crier, so
yeah.
I'll add that disclaimer.
Yeah, I am a bit of a crier as well. But afterwards, I was like, wow, okay. So I didn't explore it again for a little while. And then it came back into my life. And I was like, this blend of mindset, subconscious mind work, and nervous system regulation is this trifecta of transformation, really, that I've been working with and working with my clients. And you can't just do one of those three. For me, it needs to be all of them.
Mm. I love it. I love it. I also have so many things I want to say to what you just said. I was also thinking about something that I saw you post. Man, this doctor's Instagram is on fire. I swear. Like everything I say, I'm like, she posted this and then she posted that. You posted something that just really resonated for me. And I was like, ooh, that was well said. It was something like the most dangerous thing you can say. And it was, I already know that. Or it was like the most dangerous 4 words that you could possibly say. I already know that, which is sort of like a step away from humility and a step away from openness and playfulness. It's a form of stuckness. And so many of us have been trained and conditioned to like, I already know that. Don't, it's a vulnerable place to say, I don't know everything, or I'm curious. Maybe I don't know everything, or maybe there's more for me to learn. Maybe there's a way for me to dip into something that I'm not already an expert in. And that's a hard thing for folks like us who've been through the veterinary profession where you're essentially punished if you don't already know that,
Hmm.
like essentially punished by potentially the profession, the education, and even the client at times. Or we've internalized that self punishment somehow. I don't know why, but it's pervasive in the veterinary community in my experience. And I think that relaxing around that having to know everything and the relaxing around having to be perfect and having to have these expectations and meet the expectations and allowing maybe like something that's like a real release of control is accessing your subconscious mind. That's
Yes.
a real step into the world of humility because you don't know what's going to come up. You don't have control over what's in there, right? That's a script that is happening outside of your consciousness, outside of your control. That is content that is there. And, but, whether we want it to or not, or whether we know it or not, it has a significant impact on how we show up in the world. And I think to me, the subconscious mind has been an interest of mine for a while through my work with psilocybin facilitation in the world of, I guess most people know it as magic mushrooms. But the psilocybe species of mushrooms, which contains psilocybin. And basically, that's another form of subconscious work where you remove the conscious layers of the mind, basically, and you're accessing the actual subconscious, like you're experiencing your subconscious mind and observing what's there. And, for those of you that are listening, any way that I've engaged with this is legal. It's through a certification process in the state of Oregon. I was in the second cohort of trainees to be certified with like a legal certification process in the state of Oregon. And it's very much in that realm of relaxing our expectations and being open to what's there and being able to say, I don't already know that. Like, what don't I know about myself? What don't I know about the person I'm talking to right now? And just opening that up. And so I love that you approach this work through the subconscious mind, because I think without addressing the subconscious mind, how is it possible to really make any meaningful observations about ourselves and therefore to get more comfortable in our own skin and our own lives, right?
So powerful. I already know that energy, as I call it, is so toxic. And like you say, it's something that's almost glorified in certain walks of life. There is a quote from, I think it's from the Zen Mind, it's a Buddhist quote that says, I'm going to paraphrase it because I can't remember it off the top of my head, but it's basically saying, In the beginner's mind, there are many possibilities. In the expert's mind, there are few.
Mhm.
And we see this when you get tunnel vision. Say, to use a veterinary example, if you have a case, you see what's written down on the console, and you're like, well, I know what this is. And if you close yourself off to it being anything else, then you might get blindsided. So there's that negative aspect of it as well. Yes, there are things where, common things are common. You hear hooves, you think horses, not zebra. But it's like, can you allow yourself to be open to the possibility of it being something else? And that requires so much humility and flexibility and awareness and presence. It requires you being present. It's not thinking, oh, I already know what's wrong with this animal. So, like, you're already jumping ahead. We're not actually dealing with the animal in front of you or the situation in front of you. You miss something that was on the clinical exam because you've already decided that this is what's wrong with it. So, how can we actually be more of a beginner and have that humility? On the other hand, as you say, there's an expectation that you should know everything. There's another quote that I'm going to just paraphrase, and I can't even remember who said it, but it was to do with, I think it was Carol Dweck's work, and it was to do with imposter syndrome and like growth mindsets. And it was actually a quote from a student who they were talking to about imposter syndrome. And they didn't name the student, but the student said they were in school at this time, and they said, I feel like I should already know everything that I've come here to learn. And that hit home for me so much. And I think we're almost going through life like that sometimes,
Oh, yeah.
of expecting us to know everything. And if you think about that, how ridiculous is it? You're thinking that your little conscious brain can hold all of the information about things. Like, the expectations we put on ourselves is insane, when what we really should be cultivating is that curiosity, is that ability to learn. Because the more you shut yourself off by saying, I already know that, then the less you'll actually learn, it's just so ironic. It's paradoxical. And it's like, how can you just let yourself be a beginner? And that's where letting your conscious mind take a little bit of a back seat, whether that be through something like psilocybin or something like theta healing, hypnosis, anything to let yourself just get out of that state, be a little bit more open, it's so powerful. And there was something else I was going to say, but it's escaped me right now. So I'm going to turn it back to you for a moment and see if it comes back it was on that train of thought.
No, it'll come back. It'll come
Yeah.
back. We're hot on the trail of like some good stuff right here. It's really interesting that like you do a lot of work with the inner critic, like the
Mhm.
constantly negating oneself. And coming back to psilocybin because I'm obsessed with it. And it's like one of the most powerful, amazing medicines I've ever experienced and supported others in their journeys with. So what it does is it takes what's called the default mode network offline. It's a part of the brain functioning. You're nodding like you understand. And that's the inner critic. That's essentially the part of you that's like, no, that's not a good idea. No, that's not a good idea. That's bad. That's bad. Don't do that. Don't do that. Don't do that. And instead, I've had it explained to me by one of my mentors, who's actually my naturopathic doctor, Dr. Erica Zelfand. She's wonderful. She talked about the brain and the subconscious kind of having all of these ideas, like as a child, like, can I jump off this roof and fly? That would be cool. How about I go and eat all of the candy in the universe in one day? That would be cool. And your default mode network is, as you grow up, comes in to tell you, no, don't do that. You're going to die. Like the DMN is meant to keep you alive, essentially. And meanwhile, as an adult, you are constantly with this default mode network suppressing ideas, many of which are creative and wonderful ideas, but your default mode network may not have allowed your conscious brain to even perceive those ideas. Like, I would like to try this, and that would bring me a lot of joy. Your default mode network brain is going to say something like, no, that's stupid. You're not good at that. Or you don't need that training or that experience because you already know that. Or, that all of these inner critic, like, you're not good enough, you shouldn't be doing that, you'll get killed if you do that, you'll be excommunicated from the community if you do that. Default mode network. And in psilocybin, that is just taken offline. So you can just see what's there. It's like this most unbelievable look into our own psyches, and it unlocks so much good. And then, later after you're outside of the journey and your default mode network comes back online, you can say, yeah, it wasn't a good idea to try and fly. We're not going to do that. But this other idea I had to actually become a yoga teacher, that was great. Why not? Let's do it, And so you have these like access to different parts of your curiosity and the parts of like the deep parts of you, the authentic parts of you and what they want. You can actually hear it and not have that inner critic squash the idea before you're even aware that it exists. And then I also wanted to talk about the binaural beats a little bit. You were talking about the theta waves. I love how that comes into play in healing modalities. And I'm curious, I use binaural beats all the time for studying, for sleep, focus. And I know you've used some of this in your accessing the subconscious mind as well. Can you talk a little bit about that and how you use it in that way?
Yeah, for sure. So I always use binaural beats in the theta brainwave state when I'm doing subconscious healing and subconscious work, because again, it just adds that extra layer of accessing that part of your brain and accessing that part of you that's almost like a dreamlike state. So something that I want to say about the subconscious healing sessions that I do is whilst your conscious mind is taking that little bit of a back seat, you still have like full autonomous control. Like it's very consent based. It's not, we're going in there and we're just rearranging things. Like, absolutely not. And I always say to people, especially if it's only like a one off or we've only had a couple of sessions, it's like these things are in layers. Like, we often have this desire to be like, okay, I want to fix this and I want to fix it yesterday. And like, this needs to solve all of my problems.
Mm.
And again, this absolutely can do that sometimes, but it's not what, like, it's letting yourself be curious, be open, exactly what we're talking about. And using the binaural beats is a way to just start to automatically access that part of you that allows you to just surrender a little bit. And as a recovered control freak, like, I know how vulnerable that is. And so often talking about the inner critic as well, just to go on from that as well, is like your inner critic, as you're saying, like, it serves a purpose. It's there for a reason. I'm not of the opinion that it's some like evil saboteur trying to ruin your life.
Right.
But it gets its ammunition from the unconscious mind. So it gets its ammunition from those beliefs, those things that we continually tell ourselves, those things that we don't even remember, but are running those programs in our mind. It's like, as Carl Jung, one of his most famous quotes is, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will rule your life and you will call it fate. It's like there is things pulling the strings. And this is an opportunity to get really brave and vulnerable, because it is vulnerable, and have the humility to be like, okay, do I want to look at these systems? How do I want to look at them? And as you were talking as well, and you said so beautifully about this, I already know that energy, is sometimes it can stop us from actually looking into this further, because we use this, oh, well, I already know that. It's like, oh, well, I already know I should be kinder to myself, so I don't need to go get a coach to do that. It's like, I've already read the book. I already know that.
Right.
And it's actually another form of self-protection, because it's protecting you from looking at the deeper root by telling you that you've already done that, by
Right.
telling you that I've ticked that one off the list. Like, how often do we do that? I've done that before, for sure, of intellectualizing my feelings,
Mhm.
of psychoanalyzing them within an inch of my life. And a bit of a vulnerable confession here as well is I used to definitely feel, and I still to a degree, I'm going to put it out there, there's a part of me that has like a superiority complex when it comes to self-awareness, of being like, well, I already know that. Like, I don't need someone else to tell me what I already know. And I have to have a certain level of respect for someone and their methods, and I really need them to get me. Otherwise, I just discount any information to a fault sometimes. But I can witness that part of me
Mm.
and see it with compassion, that yes, she's a bit of a control freak and she thinks she knows best, but she's doing that because I have been hurt by people in the past who, even people who are supposed to be professionals, like, again, another kind of vulnerable story, but I've shared it before. But when I was in vet school, one of my best friends unfortunately passed away during our exams from a pulmonary embolism. So, really sudden loss. Yeah. When we were like, I was 20, she was 21. And we were mandated to go see this counselor to deal with it. And as if vet school, wasn't stressful enough. And the guy was totally unhelpful to me. And I decided at that point to disclose some, like, because I've struggled with disordered eating as a teenager and through vet school, as many vets I know will also resonate with that. And I decided to, in that state, to open up to him about this, middle-aged, cisgendered white man. And I opened up and I don't even remember the specific words that he said. And that's also about the subconscious mind as a little side note. That doesn't necessarily matter. It's like how you felt about it. But what I felt in that moment was he was telling me, and even if he didn't explicitly tell me, I interpreted it as, well, you look healthy, so it can't be that big a deal. Like that's how I internalized it.
Mm,
And I'm sure he didn't say those specific words, but that's what I heard.
mhm,
And that's what I heard. And when I had that session, for me, that then I shut the door to any kind of professional
mm,
help because I was like, they can't help me. I'm too broken. I don't know what's going on. No one's going to get me. It just made me go into my shame spiral even more of like, I have to figure this out by myself because no one's going to come save me.
mm,
And everyone else is coping really well with all the stress and everyone's functioning really well. So I've just got to do that. And I've got to push through and push through. And that's where that little protective part of me comes from of, do I trust this person to
yeah,
actually be able to hold space for me and to
mm,
understand what I'm going through? Feeling a bit emotional even thinking about this because I'm just like,
yeah,
but that little part of me, she's not, doesn't think she's superior because she thinks she's better than everyone. She just knows what it's like to have someone completely not see you in a really vulnerable state
yeah,
and how horrible that feels. So these parts of you, this inner critic, this self-sabotage, I always see self-sabotage as a form of self-protection.
yes,
It is so misunderstood. You are not out to get you, even if it feels like it sometimes. And it's like, how can we just let that part of you be seen, be heard? She doesn't have to rule the show. Like, she needs to not rule the show, actually, but she needs to know that she's included.
mhm,
And this is why I'm so passionate about creating spaces and containers for people to bring all of them. Like,
mm.
all parts are welcome. There's no judgment, there's no shame. We're just gonna, as Ram Dass would say, like, we're all just walking each other home.
Ross, I love
Yeah,
that. Oh, I love that. That's one of my favorite quotes that just like encapsulates the human experience, right? And oh, I love this story so much. It sounds like you're talking a little bit about internal family systems. I'm not sure if you learned it in framework. I've been kind of dabbling in that work myself a little bit. And basically, according to that paradigm or that framework, we all have all these different parts of us that will get the spotlight put on them at any given moment or take over the whole show or whatever. But every aspect of who we are, every part of who we are is there for a reason. And it's something that we've experienced. And it's in most cases trying to protect us for a reason. You know, every emotion is valid. Every emotion, every part of us is valid because it's there because of something we've already experienced. Every moment leading up to this moment in our lives has created a sense of our perception of the world and what needs to be done in order to keep us safe from it or within it, right? It's
absolutely.
such a powerful frame of reference. And I love that you shared those vulnerable moments. And I think we all benefit from hearing the why, the what got us to where we are in these sort of protective states. And that's a part of such a powerfully impactful way to explain our humanity, right? Like we all have these parts that are wounded or we showed our vulnerable selves and we're like shat on essentially, right? Or we perceive to have been shat on. And so we are who we are as a result, and that's normal and natural and valid. And I think that's where the work is for us to kind of look at like where those protective impulses come from, why they're there, honor them, and see if they still serve us, right?
Absolutely. And this is why I do believe that this work is so, so needed because, and it's needed in a more holistic way, like in not in a preaching, like this is the only way to do things. Like I love internal family systems. I think it's so incredible. It's probably something that I will like officially study. Like I've done a lot of my own studying around it, but there's so much like permission
Mm,
in there just to be yourself. And again, it's that loving awareness. It's not shaming yourself into change because that does not work. I'm just thinking of like, like the David Goggins-esque, this is what we need to do all day, every day. And it's like this always like that probably worked for some people, but that pushing through resistance is not really the answer most of the time. There is an element of expanding your nervous system's capacity for change
mm,
and gently stretching your comfort zone Because unless we do that, over time, it makes your world smaller and smaller and smaller. Like, unless you practice consistently stretching that comfort zone, that window of tolerance, as they would say, in terms of expanding your nervous system's capacity to handle change and to handle new experiences. But what we don't want to do is just shock the system so much that you pull it out so far and you just let go and it's like right back and it's even smaller than when it started. And even with the hair analogy that you said about the workshop, like that just came to me on the spot. So it wasn't the most
Great.
articulate analogy, but if anyone of you can see, my hair is very curly and yeah, if I start brushing it, it's going to be wild. It needs like a gentle tangling in the right conditions with a lot of conditioner. Otherwise, it's going to be an absolute mess.
Mm.
But if I was also going to treat it by just, cutting all of my hair off, like that shock to my system would be so much for me. It's just allowing yourself to keep expanding your world and being in a space where you can do that, being around people who hold you
Mm.
accountable, because we can have all this awareness, but if you're not doing anything with it,
Right.
it's not actually that helpful. Like there needs to be a step forward. And that's where coaching and being in spaces where you're having these conversations. Like, yes, it's great to be inspired by a podcast or by a book or something saving a post on Instagram. But most of us know what we should be doing, but it's how to actually implement it that
Mhm.
is where the magic happens.
Mhm. Yeah, I couldn't agree with that more. I think it's very easy. So, kind of in my world, the way I work with veterinarians is through helping them start their house call practices or pivot their house call or mobile practices so that it can be more aligned for them. And there's so much, you can get anything you want off the internet, right? You can get anything off a free podcast, but doing the work often involves accountability. It involves community. It involves being seen and being met at exactly where you are by someone who can take you by the hand, see you in the challenges that you're facing and help you implement, just the knowledge that I already know that is very different from an implementation mindset and a community and a space or a container that actually helps and allows you to do that implementation. So, man, we have so much to talk about and we've been going for ages and I feel like we have a lot more episodes in the pipeline that need to be recorded, I could tell you right now.
For
But for
sure.
now, I wanted to start to close up shop and see if there's anything else that you'd like for our house call vet listeners to know about you or any other words of wisdom you might like to share with them.
Really just echoing everything that we've said about honoring your authenticity, like taking the time to actually connect with yourself, however that looks to you. And that's going to be so different. And listening to those little whispers, and that might sound a little bit woo woo, a little bit cringy, but there is a humility and a courage and a vulnerability involved in slowing down long enough to actually ask what you want, to ask for help if you need it. And we all need it. And also to have the courage to find the right person to help you as well, the person that suits you, that you vibe with, and be okay with not being for everyone and
Yeah.
being okay with being misunderstood. Like
Ooh.
that would be it's okay. So often people aren't going to get it. Like a lot of the time if you're always doing something because you want the external validation, like you're never going to actually achieve that sense of inner peace and inner clarity that you're looking for. And I can almost guarantee that if you do follow those whispers, even if there are naysayers at the start, those people are probably going to turn around in a year or two when you're absolutely rocking it and be like, wow, I'm really inspired. And that's not why you're doing it. But just know that it doesn't make sense until people see the final result anyway.
Right.
Yeah. So I would say that would be my message to anyone. And yeah, if anyone does want to connect further, then the best place to find me is on Instagram at Finding Flowstate for all my sort of up to date offerings and options for working together. Yeah, I have a couple to finish up. I have a couple more questions that I ask everyone on my podcast for you if you are
Mhm.
open at this point.
I am open.
Yeah. So the first question is, what makes you feel like your most authentic self?
Oh, I love that question. Well, the few things that are coming into my mind right now are when I have my flute in my hands, when I'm practicing. Not even performing, I love performing, but when I'm practicing, I am like connected into my body. I'm feeling my breath. I have my body and my mind are most integrated with each other. And then out comes music from my soul. So my music and my flute in my hands. And then when I have a lot of different colors in my hair, like I just got my rainbow redone. I have blue hair right now with a little rainbow in the front. That makes me feel like me. Like that sort of externalizes my authentic inside and lets people see like a little touch of like what I feel inside. Thank you. That's a great question.
I love that because basically what you just described there with the flute is basically flow state, which is
Yeah.
why which is why my podcast is called Finding Flowstate, which is
Mhm.
why I've really embodied this because that is like you're at your most authentic in flow state. Like it's pure presence, it's pure response to something. It's responding to the environment. It's not worrying about what's happening in the future or what's happening in the past. Yeah, I love that so much. So, yeah, thank you for such a beautiful description of it.
Yeah.
And the other question that I have is what one piece of advice would you give to your younger self?
Oh, I love that. Oh my God. Oh man, are you trying to make me cry already? Yeah, I would say it's gonna be okay. You're loved and it's okay to be who you really are. Yeah.
Beautiful. I
Thank you.
love that. And is there anything else that you'd love to share with my listeners, your listeners, anything that we haven't covered, any ways to work with you at the moment?
Sure. So if you're interested in working with me for your house call practice or your house call curious, or you'd like to transition the house call or mobile practice you have now, or maybe move from corporate practice to owning your own house call practice, I'm your girl. I can definitely help you with that. I offer coaching. I have a community. I have continuing education programs, online on demand programs, and check out my podcast as well, which is called the House Call Vet Cafe. We are very focused on house call and mobile vets, but we are applicable to almost any other type of entrepreneur as well. So this is stories of us, me interviewing veterinarians, house call veterinarians, mobile vets who are just getting started, people who have been doing this for a long time. And it's a general focus on like wellness, entrepreneurship, and authenticity, just from a really different angle from your finding flow state. And I'd encourage you guys to come join us. Check us out. I'm on Instagram as the House Call Vet Academy, also on Facebook as the House Call Vet Academy. And I'm around.
Beautiful. Well, this has been such a soul nourishing conversation. It's just a privilege to, have these sorts of conversations. This is where I feel most alive in these conversations. So thank you so much.
Amazing. It really shows you shine in this area. And I guess I'd also like to, one more thing, just say Zen mind, beginner's mind is really something that I think is good for all of us. And I love how you explained that. And I can't wait for our next conversation because I know there will be more.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm looking forward to it already.
Amazing.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode of the House Call Vet Cafe. If you enjoyed this episode, then hit the subscribe or follow button on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, YouTube, or wherever you listen to podcasts so you never have to miss an episode. This podcast is made specifically for you, so don't be shy if you'd like to reach out and let me know your thoughts on this episode. You can find me on Instagram and Facebook as the House Call Vet Academy, where I also share more valuable content. If you're interested in learning more about consulting for house call vets or the House Call Vet Academy online course and community, please click on the link in the show notes. Have an amazing rest of your day, and I can't wait for you to join us for our next episode of the House Call Vet Cafe.